From the time of its discovery, America has been perceived as a land of mystery. Opportunities to obtain wealth, land, and prosperity have caused millions to risk everything. Throughout the centuries, countless hopefuls have abandoned their former lives to pursue even the slightest chance of fulfilling their dream life in the New World. This raises the question, just what is the American experience, and why would these people be willing to leave everything behind to get it?
America is a nation distinct from all others and offers a unique experience to each of its citizens. After centuries of reform and improvement, it is clear that the lone constant is the fundamental value that an individual may speak freely and advocate for change.
Even before its existence as a nation, America offered an opportunity for individual improvement and change to any who were dissatisfied with their current circumstances. After word of Jamestown spread through England, people were packing their bags to make the great move. Colonies like Jamestown appealed especially to the lower classes in Europe, as well as to the second sons of nobles who desired land and fortune. Though economic gain was a major incentive for migrating, the promise of a life free from religious persecution was equally as motivating for many. Several northern colonies were founded on a basis of religious freedom. The Massachusetts Bay Colony, for example, was founded by John Winthrop for the practice of Puritan Christianity. Similarly, Pennsylvania was settled by Quakers who were very tolerant of varying religions and promoted peaceful interaction. Though the colonies were founded for varying reasons, they would eventually be forced to band together despite their differences to achieve a common goal.
Though colonial life contradicted all practices in England, the mother country would not release its grasp on her colonies, ultimately leading to the deterioration in the relations between England and America. For many years, the British monarchy continuously infringed upon the rights of the colonists. With acts such as the Sugar Act, Stamp Act, and the Townshend Acts, England heavily taxed the colonies, disregarding their protests and prompting the slogan, "No taxation without representation." Despite many attempts by the colonists at compromise, King George could not be reasoned with. It was then that these colonies performed an action that at the time was unheard of. The 13 colonies unified against the world's top power. The determined colonies came out victorious.
With their newly gained independence, the colonies were faced with the daunting task of drafting the government from scratch. With most colonists holding the opinion that a monarchy must be avoided at all costs, their first attempt at government was the Articles of Confederation. Though the Articles were not successful, they revealed the power of popular sovereignty and the priority of the colonists that the new government would stay within its limits and not infringe upon individual freedoms. The next attempt at government was much more successful, yet it would still prove to be the ultimate experiment. Main debates on its ratification took place between the Anti-Federalists, who stressed the necessity of a Bill of Rights, which would protect individual rights, and the Federalists, who felt that the existing limits on the government sufficiently protected the individual. The Anti-Federalists persisted, and the U.S. Constitution, which would soon include a Bill of Rights, was ratified.
The first and arguably the most well-known amendment of the Bill of Rights states that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble, and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. This amendment would become significantly exercised by Americans in the years to come.
Though it greatly improved upon the Articles of Confederation, the new government would soon be tested with the presidency of John Adams. Adams, who had been a notoriously persistent Federalist, as well as one who struggled with criticism, passed the Alien Sedition Act. In Section 2, these acts read, "And be it farther enacted, that if any person shall write, print, utter, or publish, or shall cause or procure to be written, printed, uttered, or published, or shall knowingly and willingly assist or aid in writing, printing, uttering, or publishing any false, scandalous, and malicious writing, or writings against the government of the United States, then such person, being thereof convicted before any court of the United States, having jurisdiction thereof, shall be punished by a fine not exceeding $2,000 and by imprisonment not exceeding 2 years." Adams was immediately confronted with backlash. America's citizens were furious with his failure to abide by the First Amendment. The incidents would yet again reflect the highly valued idea that all citizens possess the right to speak and advocate their beliefs freely.
At one point, America was merely a small group of states that had finally escaped the grasp of an overbearing mother country. Now it was an independent nation that sprawled from coast to coast. Though this independence signified the long-awaited freedom that many United States citizens had desired, others living in the states weren't as lucky. For slaves, life in America continued as it had before this independence. Though many saw the irony in this situation, that the states had seceded from England based on arguments of mistreatment and abused rights, yet continued to practice slavery, other people did not seem to notice the contradiction or to care. This issue inspired the rise of the abolitionist movement, in which many voiced their opinions on the matter in efforts to convince the other side. These efforts not only advocated on behalf of the slaves, but also inspired varying forms of rebellion carried out by the slaves themselves. While most of this rebellion took the form of slow work, feigned sickness, and the destruction of property, others such as Nat Turner organized major riots that involved the massacre of white slave owners and their families. With the continued threat of the abolishment of slavery, the Southern economy was increasingly put at risk. These factors, along with the ever-existent opposing political views, caused tensions between the North and South to rise higher than they'd ever been before, ultimately resulting in the secession of the South and the Civil War. Though the Civil War today is often perceived as a war of morality, it was monumental in enforcing the American values of fighting for one's beliefs.
The Civil War left America in shambles. Though all the states were once again united under one flag, the once prominent sense of nationalism was almost non-existent. Despite this, immigration continued to soar, fueled by the American identity, which was centered on the ability to dictate one's own success. Two primary examples of this self-led success are Andrew Carnegie and John D. Rockefeller. Carnegie, a Scottish immigrant, went on to capture the steel industry after a poor upbringing as a railroad worker. Rockefeller, an American native, born to an impoverished farming family, captured the oil industry, making him the richest man in the world at his time. Success stories like these inspired wealth seekers to travel to the United States, and with hopes of capturing this American experience. Unfortunately, those who experienced this success overshadowed the underlying issues of the majority of the population. Most Americans at this time experienced daily struggles of poverty, inhumane treatment, and unsanitary conditions. These circumstances inspired many to speak up. Upton Sinclair's novel, The Jungle, called attention to the horrific practices within the meat industry. Additionally, advocates like Dorothea Dix defended the mistreated mentally ill and pleaded for positive change. Furthermore, labor unions became increasingly popular as frustrations towards selfish business owners increased. Incidents such as the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire led to more protests for stricter workplace regulations.
Though the United States experienced economic trouble during the Gilded Age, nothing could prepare the nation for what it would experience during the 1930s. When the stock market crashed in 1929, the United States entered the deepest and longest-lasting economic downturn in the history of the Western industrial world. The Great Depression had devastating effects on both the rich and the poor. Income, tax revenue, profits, and international trade all plummeted, while unemployment rates skyrocketed. These circumstances caused many citizens to voice their frustrations and demand government intervention. Though the citizens did not gain much assistance from President Herbert Hoover, the election of Franklin Delano Roosevelt in 1933 brought the desired change. With the implementation of FDR's New Deal, programs such as the Public Works Administration and the Civilian Conservation Corps offered employment and income to those struggling to survive. Additionally, Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, or FDIC, as well as the FCIC and the FHA, made adjustments to current economic practices in order to prevent a recurrence of the current situation. FDR's New Deal was revolutionary in that it redefined the role of the government in the economy and its relationships with the citizens. In introducing his new program, Roosevelt delivered a speech to Chairman Walsh and the members of the Democratic National Convention of 1932. I pledge myself to a new deal for the American people. Let us all here assembled constitute ourselves prophets of a new order of competence and of courage. This is more than a political campaign. It is a call to arms. Give me your help, not to win votes alone, but to win in this crusade to restore America to its own people. The New Deal cannot be seen as completely successful, since it ultimately did not end the Depression. It did greatly improve the nation's situation, and took place as a direct result of Americans advocating for the change they desired.
Though the African American population had major successes in the Civil War with the abolishing of slavery as well as in becoming legal citizens, they continued to face major obstacles as a result of deeply rooted racism still present in some areas of the country. Segregation, the idea of separate but equal, resulted in poor conditions for blacks. Whites received higher pay, better education, and were able to get the best jobs. Though they technically received all of the same rights as whites, Blacks certainly weren't of the same quality. After much discrimination and oppression, protests were organized by civil rights leaders. Peaceful leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. encouraged protests in the form of marches, boycotts, and sit-ins. These forms of rebellion were intended to send a message without causing aggression.
I have a dream. My 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream.
Other, more radical leaders, like Malcolm X, encouraged violence and felt that the only way to achieve equality was to do so through riots and fighting. Those who participated in protests were typically arrested, most often without breaking any law. Despite this, civil rights supporters continued to exercise their freedom of speech and spread awareness over the mistreatment of African Americans in the South. After years of protests, the civil rights movement proved successful. In the court case of Brown v. Board of Education, the segregation of schools was ruled illegal. Though black students such as the Little Rock Nine suffered from extreme threats and sometimes even violence, it was still a major landmark within the movement because it had finally received government recognition. 9 years later, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was passed, outlawing discrimination based on race, religion, color, sex, or national origin. This act was monumental for minorities. By voicing their grievances and advocating for their rights, civil rights workers were able to successfully aid individuals who had previously faced severe oppression. The success of the civil rights movement would go on to encourage other minority groups like feminists and Chicanos to advocate for their own rights. Though they struggled at times, all movements showed great persistence and were eventually greatly rewarded.
Whether it be advocating for independence, a Bill of Rights, freedom, better treatment, or equality, it is clear that the United States of America was founded upon values of free speech and independent belief. And throughout history, citizens have exercised their rights countless times.
No matter the goal, these fundamental freedoms keep the country moving forward by allowing people in the United States to create the change they desire and fulfill their goals for society.
They have given the United States the timeless identity of the land of opportunity and will forever allow citizens to define their own American experience.